are here for another amazing episode, and we have a very special one today, and it's about my favorite subject, which is giants, the Nephilim, whatever you want to call them. And I know we talked about many different giants from Peru to the native, the ones that the Native Americans spoke about, but we haven't really touched on the ones that are on the islands. And today I have a very special guest, and I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell us about herself. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Heather Arnold. I live in Aruba, which is a Caribbean island off the northern coast of South America. And I have been studying the giants of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao for over 15 years, basing all of my research off of the archaeological record. So I have delved with my own money and my own time through all the archaeological reports, as many as I can get a hold of, and putting together the story of this ancient race of giants that inhabited these islands approximately 7,000 years ago. It actually might have even been longer ago. And they were an advanced race of humans with elongated skulls and very robust bones, bodies, big people, way over 8 feet tall. And they were the original interaction between these giants was with that sparked my whole rabbit hole of research, was a detailed encounter that Amerigo Vespucci had with the giants on his first voyage to what was the New World, basically was in mainland South America, and he knew of the giants living in this area. So he came to Aruba and documented very specifically his interaction with the giants. And then he named the islands of Aruba and Curacao. At that point, they didn't know about Bonaire. He named those islands the islands of the giants, and says it's because of the large stature of the people living here. And from that point, I began to study the petroglyphs, which are similar themes that we see all over the world: the spirals, the cup and ring motif, different types of anthropomorphic figures that the scientists like to call them. And so I began to also piece together what I believe is an advanced civilization of giants who were the dominant people of these islands, who might have had a connection to other people living on Earth at that same time, although they were spread apart by oceans and land. And this I base off the fact that there are so many similar motifs of petroglyphs and pictographs that are found here that are also found globally, really all over the world. And so I just went down this rabbit hole of the giants and have been at it ever since.
Yeah, the subject of the giants is very intriguing. Like I was telling you before the show started, it's one of the main things that got me sucked into it. It just sounds so insane to even hear about something that's humanoid standing 20, 30. I mean, I hear sometimes even 40 feet tall from some of these, ancient writings. And it just sounds like, what? 40 feet tall? How's that even possible? But, with that being said, what started you on this journey with this obsession? Like, what was the first thing you ran into that was like, I need to dig into this?
Well, first I had a tour company here. So I was doing private Jeep tours and Harley Davidson rentals and tours. And I really wanted my tours to be different. So I wanted the history of the island to be accurate. I had been involved in a lot of tour companies, with friends on tours, kind of doing reconnaissance work to see what other people were saying about the giants and about Aruba, not the giants, about the history. None of them say anything about the giants, but they said a lot of things that are kind of fluff and kind of augmented the truth in some ways, but never really told the full story. They're working on tips. So for them, they just want to make it entertaining and fun. And so I didn't want to have that kind of a tour. So I immediately went to the Archaeology Museum and began to do a little research there. But ultimately, it was the petroglyphs that really, and the pictographs that really sucked me in, because to see these common motifs that we see globally of the cup and ring and of the spirals, it's just so interesting to me. Also, there's a pictograph of a pregnant woman, and she has a baby in her womb and a little cut mark for the belly button. And then next to her, all these strike marks, which I have seen in other places, particularly out in the Anasazi ruins of Sedona, that these are birthing chambers. That pictograph of the woman, which is a veil with the baby, is also a very common petroglyph, and same with the strike marks denoting births. So that's a global theme. So right away, it was very intriguing to see these global themes found in the writing, the ancient writing that's here. And I began then to dig deeper and realize that, let me think about when were these islands first put on a map. And the first map that was ever made of Aruba was in 1502. It's called the Mappus Mundi, and it called Aruba and Curacao the islands of the giants. And that was the first mention of the islands being called the islands of the giants. I then went into and read Vespucci's first letters, or second letters of his first voyage. And that is when he came to Aruba, and he had an encounter with the people, the giants. So he writes about it very specifically. And what people try to say is, he was trying to sell books and all this stuff. I mean, Vespucci, first of all, was a very wealthy man. He was in the Medici family. He didn't really need money. He was more in it for really research, maybe, I'm sure, treasure. But also he has had a team of researchers on his voyage with him. He had doctors, pharmacists, people involved with the flora, the fauna, anthropologist type people, even though that wasn't a real science at that time, but people who were documenting specific parts of the journey everywhere they went. And so when he came to the island of Aruba from the mainland of South America with his team, they first came to the shore and noticed giant footsteps on the sand, and they immediately wanted to follow the footsteps. They had an idea that there were giants here. They also knew that there was gold here. And that, I think, was the main draw of coming to Aruba, of course, was gold. So the mainland people told Vespucci and his team that, yes, there were giants and they were peaceful unless they were provoked. So when they land on the island and they follow the footsteps, they come to a village and they see these women, and they see two teenage girls and an older woman and another woman who looks like the mother. And they began to be marveled at the height and the size of these people. They've never seen people so large in their lives. And so then they try to talk to them, and obviously there was a communication breakdown. He makes note of how their village looked, how they would get collecting water. He gets very specific in his description of the giant women. And then he and the team decide they're going to take the teenage girls and bring them on the boat with them so they can bring them back to Europe and show everyone who's financing this trip, the queen, the king, and et cetera, like these girls, and give them as a gift. And as they're coming up with this plan, 36 men of even larger stature come into the village. And Vespucci makes note not only of their size, but of the size of their weaponry. He doesn't understand. He figures he can't even lift a couple of those weapons. They're so large. He's trying to figure out what they could be using it for. And he immediately aborts mission on stealing the girls because he realizes he's not going to win with these giants. And there begins to be a sort of a confrontation. And Vespucci decides, let's go back to the boat. And they go back to the boat, and Vespucci makes mention that all the while the giant men were following them all the way back to the boat and even into the water once they were on the boat. And Vespucci gets scared, and he orders the men to shoot a cannon into the water to scare them, not to hurt them, but to scare them because he's starting to panic. He makes mention, actually, that he thought he was going to die that day. which is interesting because the day before, or a couple of days before, he was on an island off the coast of what is now Colombia, and he was witnessed a human on a Spitfire being roasted and eaten. So he was more afraid of the giants in Aruba than seeing cannibals devouring a human and cooking and devouring a human. So he mentions then, he names this island the Island of the Giants due to the large stature of the people there. He makes mention that even if they were kneeling, they would still be taller than him if he were standing. So when I hear this story, I think it's rather intriguing. And so then I began the deep dive. I figure, well, if there were giants here, it's on a map, the Island of the Giants. He doesn't say that there were giants anywhere else. He doesn't say, he had been to a lot of places. This was the first place where he mentioned the stature of the people. And so then I figured, well, there must be something in the archaeological record, and there is. And so that led me down a quest of just trying to find as many archaeological reports as I could, and praying that I could go into. Interestingly, as a side note, a lot of the studies that I didn't purchase but just made copies of were found in medical libraries. So a lot of the archaeological reports on the giants, specifically their physical and anatomical descriptions, are found in medical libraries, which is quite interesting. So I had to, ask, beg in universities, please, can I go in and take pictures of these studies? I went all over the world finding these studies and really pieced together the story of the giants, how they lived, how they were the dominant people here, how they buried their dead. It's been a deep dive ever since, and more information is always uncovered all the time. Since I moved back here, I was living here before my daughter was born. I moved back to New York, but have since moved back here. And since I've moved back, I've discovered many megaliths, balance stones, dolmen, menhirs, all with an astrological alignment attached to them, most of them. So it's been quite a journey uncovering the giants here, and it's quite intriguing. They were they did so many curious things on such grand scale, and it's a shame because hardly anyone knows about it. So I think I'm the only human on Earth talking about this. So I'm happy to do it, and will continue to do it as long as I can.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting things that you said. I don't know where to start. So the one of the things I want to start is with, I don't think I've ever asked this question before, but one of the questions I ask is that, is there any information on what their religion was? If they have a religion, is there a god they worship? Was there any kind of idols maybe they were worshiping? Because one thing that I read was we did a podcast on the diaries of the conquistadors, the ones that went to Peru, and also wrote about the giants they saw. And one of the interesting things that they wrote down is that when they first encountered, because these conquistadors, they wore, that armor, the big chrome armor, right, and, the helmet. And, I guess when the giants first encountered, those soldiers with the armor, they started, kind of praising them, and they started pointing at the sky, basically saying, they're assuming they came from the sky. So the first thing that comes into my head is that there's a lot of stories of what angels look like. Angels, they have these, they're big, they have the armor, and, they're divine. So I thought that was very interesting that the giants were like, oh, is this an angel? So my question is, do you have any, type of information that maybe what they were worshiping or something like that?
There's only one report that I've been able to find, and it's of when the mainland Amerindians, which is in current-day Venezuela, when they were talking about, I believe, really first they were talking to Christopher Columbus. He was actually here first. He never got to Aruba, but it was on his to-do list when he came back. But Vespucci stole the contract from Columbus. He set him up. First, Vespucci married into the Medici family, who were financing all these trips over here. And then he made up a story that Columbus was embezzling money so he could get Columbus's contract. So when he came over here, he knew he was coming to Aruba. When he was getting tips from the people of the mainland of South America, the only report I can find is that they worship the sun. And so there are petroglyphs where the sun is featured. There are astronomical events marking the sun, the solstices, and the equinoxes. I even believe the total lunar solar eclipse is marked by one of the petroglyphs. So that actually kind of makes sense to me. They also were very, I believe it was a matriarchal society. They have statues of women, again, with veils on. So I don't know if the women were revered. I know that the women were in control. For example, the largest cemetery that's found here so far, they've unearthed, I believe, 75 ancient remains of bodies. They were all in isosceles triangles. So the giants were obsessed with isosceles triangles. And so there was only one central burial that was the most complex burial, and all alone. And that was a female. So, and she was very old. She was the oldest skeletal remains found. She was in her late 40s. So that's what they're guessing. So I don't know if the women were worshipped or that they were just the head of everything, but for sure they had some sort of relationship. I mean, living on this island, it's sunny almost every day, so I can see why they would have a relationship with the sun. And that's really the only hints that we have of what the spirituality of the giants was. For now, that's all we have. I will keep digging, of course.
Yeah, that's definitely very interesting that you say there was women there, because again, a lot of the stuff that I read before, I mean, all the areas of different giants that we read about, they all got different characteristics. Like, for example, the ones in Peru, they were assuming that this conquistador was from the sky. Now, why would they assume that? Because they probably saw something from the sky that looked like that. That's the only thing I could possibly imagine. Otherwise, how could they why even connect the two, the giants? And another thing is that the ones in Peru, they didn't come with women. They came only with men, and they came on reed rafts, and they were naked. This is what the conquistadors wrote. And I guess they were like, kind of like a mule. These giants, they couldn't breed with, I guess, their own kind. So how were they being born? I don't know, because it was only from one source that had to be repeated. So these giants couldn't breed with even a female giant if they could. I don't know. I don't know how, we don't know. So, but that's very interesting that they're like a mule. Like once they're born, they can't really reproduce. So what was producing them, over and over? That's a very, interesting.
Interestingly, in the burial the birthing chamber that's in a series of caves right outside my window here, there are tick marks of births that have occurred within the cave, as well as a petroglyph of a pregnant woman with a baby, also with a veil inside of her, with a indentation of a belly button made in the stone. And there aren't a lot of tick marks. So the giants here in Aruba had elongated skulls. These skulls were not elongated by head binding. It was not artificial. That's been archaeologically noted by the researchers, that they didn't find any evidence of head binding. And so because of that, and they found an infant, an infant with an elongated skull. So when you find an infant with an elongated skull, when there's artificial elongation, it takes at least 6 months to elongate the skull from a baby. So that's another way that they determined that the elongation was natural. So I'm presuming that it was very difficult to give birth to giant babies, and because of the structure of the head. And the elongation of these giants goes up and back. So I've seen the Paracas skulls. I've been to Peru, and they're straight up, very tall, elongated skulls. But these skulls here go up and back. So, right, exactly. Most of their brain case is towards the back of their head, and that's why their head is positioned differently on the skeleton, because they have to accommodate the weight of that brain in the back, so that where the neck goes into the skull is in a different position than it is for us. So I know that eventually, due to the mitochondrial DNA evidence from a genetic study that was done in 2002, that they were they had to have at some point started mating with average statured people, because the mitochondrial DNA of the Aruban people who live here and have never left the island, they had to find participants for this study who were their grandmother, their great grandmother, as far back as I could remember, did not leave the island, because then they had the purest DNA, the most unadulterated DNA. And they found that the modern Arubans still carry the archaic giant DNA in them. So to me, I think what happened was that eventually, I mean, I don't think they had a lot of births. I don't even know if there were a lot of giants. I don't know if you're a giant, why would you have to have a lot of you to dominate, because they definitely were the elite ruling class due to just by their burials alone. So, so I think that, and eventually I think they just started, procreating with average statured people to keep themselves going. So it's interesting that you say that they couldn't reproduce, and because I believe they were reproducing here, but eventually they couldn't anymore, because I guess they had run out of giants. So that's interesting that you say that, because the skeleton remains, there were 75 burials so far just in one cemetery, and they had to stop digging because the skeletons were so ancient that they were just falling to dust as soon as they would take them out of the ground. And that's just one cemetery here. And all three islands have cemeteries and skeletal remains. So it was a robust civilization, but I don't know how many there were. And at some point they did start mating with average statured people.
Yeah, I have a little theory about how they did it. I read this book called Solomon Island Mysteries, Accounts of Giants and UFOs in the Solomon Islands.
That's a great book.
Yeah. So if you read that book, I don't know if you remember the guy that was interacting with these giants. He came to the conclusion that the giants were mating with women before they got too big. Like at the age of 12 or 13 years old, these giants were mating with the women before they got too big for obvious reasons. But it still doesn't answer the question. If they were mules, it wouldn't matter, right? But somehow I guess they were kidnapping women and they were mating with them. So that's another theory that could go down, but it kind of cross paths with what the giants are in Peru. But then again, I don't know if the ones in Peru are the same as the ones over there, because then the ones in Native America have red head, light skin. And speaking of that, is there any description of what these giants look like out there?
Yes, great question. So yes, just the same thing. They had light hair, light skin, and light eyes. And that's in the archaeological report. That is believed. That's how, when they do excavations here in Aruba and Bonaire and Curacao, they can tell, is it an archaic skeletal remain or more of the Cacatillo, which were like later period from Venezuela. And they were Amerindian. And those are average statured people. They can tell right away, not only from the skull and the bones of themselves, but I'm sorry, I forgot your question. I started thinking of something totally different. You asked about, I'm sorry, what was it?
I asked again, what did they look like? Their complexion, the color of their hair, eyes, stuff like that.
Yes. So thank you. So in the archaeological record, yes, it is documented that they are different species altogether, almost. Then they don't look anything alike, and that's how during these excavations they can determine the two apart. So they in the conclusion of the latest archaeological report that I was handed to by the archaeologist who wrote the report, that these people, the giants, had light skin, light hair, and light eyes. Vespucci talks about them also being naked, having long hair, and doesn't really go into much more detail about their skin color or anything of that nature. So I don't know. We can't really determine who he encountered and what they looked like that day. But I know the modern archaeologists have determined they looked entirely different than the later period Amerindians who came from South America.
Wow, it's always interesting to hear this stuff. So I have this whole theory that I thought up of, and you could tell me what you think. So this is what I believe. I believe that these giants came from a father who is not of this world, but could also be, come in and out of this world. They could be in the spiritual and they can be in the physical. Now, the reason why I think they're born. So let's just, use the Bible as an example. Okay. The Bible says, the angels came, the ones that rebelled came down from heaven, and they started lusting after the women, and they started taking them for wives. And, according to all the sightings in the Bible, the angels are just average sized people. They're not, some of them may be 7 feet tall, but it's nothing abnormal. Some are 6 feet tall, 5'10", whatever, right? They could kind of blend in with everybody in some sort of way, but they're always described the same, blonde hair, dirty blonde hair, blue eyes, green eyes, light skin, right? Now people always say, well, why are they so big? What's the point of them being so dang big when the babies are born, if it's coming from, a regular sized person? Now, my theory is that we are, three or four dimensional people, right? Where our dimensions are 4 dimensions, right? Now, if these angels, or whatever you want to call them, whatever people's beliefs are, angels, aliens, whatever, if they could go in higher dimensions, 5th, 6th, 7th dimension, whatever, how many dimensions they are. And if that means they have those dimensions in them, they have extra dimensions that we don't have. So therefore their children on this earth would be bigger because they have extra dimensions to them from their fathers. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it could be. I think, the women here were giants too, for sure. But that could be, you never know, you don't know where's the first giant from, where did the giants come from? Is there a connection between the giants here and the giants that are found contemporaneously and globally? So I personally, I think there is a connection between all of the giants. Maybe there was a common ancestor. Maybe these guys were all refugees from some cataclysmic event that occurred, and they all scattered, and some of them ended up here. Giants do love islands. You hear a lot of Catalina Islands, Solomon Islands, the Caribbean islands. They really like islands. Malta had giants. Sicily had giants. So they really enjoyed caves. And why do they all have these things in common? It's just interesting. So there had to have been a common ancestor, and whether or not it was an interdimensional being, it's possible. You don't know. You really don't know, because it's so fascinating. There is those skeletons. Most of them are all hidden, stolen, destroyed, and no one wants to talk about it. Who's an archaeologist or an anthropologist? It's very hard to find someone who's willing to talk about this, because of such a stigma attached to it. But it's ridiculous. Just in the New York newspaper, the New York Post, one of the oldest and most popular newspapers in the United States, there was a whole article talking about, now archaeologists are starting to revisit the 10-foot tall giants that were found in a cave in Nevada. So, it's like this drip, this soft disclosure. That was just like 2 weeks ago, I believe. I have it pinned on my social media. So, and I couldn't believe it. No one even made a big deal about it. I'm like, what? This is like a major newspaper saying basically that there are giants. There were giants here. And so, I don't know. I would love to have more research, more money thrown out at it, more people researching and doing testing, tracking down the skeletons like I'm doing all on my own with my own money, traveling all over, trying to find the remains, trying to bring remains back to Aruba where they were taken from. And so anything's possible but having a common ancestor, I don't think is far-fetched at all.
Yeah, definitely. And another question I have, you said you're reading all this stuff and researching this. You said Vespucci, I say his name. He said they found weapons in their homes and stuff like that. So based on what you've learned, what kind of technology they have? What were their homes made out of? What kind of weapons that they have? That they work with metal, stuff like that, etc.
He mentioned the weapons. He described them as, they sound very strange, like big, almost like hammer type things. He couldn't even figure out when he's documented this what these could be used for. For him, he said he couldn't even lift those weapons. He couldn't believe. That's when he realized they couldn't steal those girls, because he couldn't believe that they were just carrying these weapons like it was nothing. He even made mention, Vespucci, that the weapons were bigger than he was.
Oh, wow.
So He doesn't make mention if there were animals that they caught or fish or anything like this, any game that they were hunting. So I'm not quite sure. It appears that most of them were made of heavy stones. This is a volcanic island. We have diorite, we have basalt, tonalite here. So these are heavy stones, and quartz. We have all these big stones. So I'm not quite sure. He did describe the village. It seemed like an average village that you would have in a situation like this with this climate, with reeds and palm fronds that kind of framing the house. He mentioned that the houses were huge, and he made mention that they were drinking brackish water, which is quite interesting because we have a lot of brackish water.
What is
here.
that?
And
what's brackish
water? It's water mixed with a little bit with seawater. Oh. So it has a little bit of a salt content, which when you're living here, so for example, today it's 95, but the temperature feels like almost 112. So it's we're only 16 degrees north of the equator. So it's very hot here. And so it is possible that, and studies have shown scientifically that drinking brackish water helps you retain water. So, and when I go hiking, for example, in New Mexico in the summer, I drink salt water before I go to keep myself hydrated. So it actually makes sense that they would be drinking brackish water, and I think it's quite interesting he makes note of that. So other than that, we don't know much more about the giants, I think because he had to make such a quick exit and he didn't come back. So as far as we know, so... I think that, the fact that we even get these details is fascinating. Eventually, then, of course, more people would come back and more reinforcements came. And, going back to the religion part, they kept building a church on the island that kept being destroyed by the giants. This was made note of. So obviously the giants didn't want these churches built or anything. I don't even think they cared if it was a church or anything. They wanted this island for just them. And eventually, I think they just died off from disease and whatever else, war, violence, whatever else was occurring once the rest of the Europeans came over, because they were going to take this island no matter what because there's gold. So they didn't really have a chance, sadly. But yeah, those are the only descriptions we have. Although we have many balanced stones here, there are tons of megaliths here, and I have been mapping those stones for years now. And what we're finding is, so just like with the pictographs and the petroglyphs, all of them go in the same pattern across the entire island. So they go from northwest to southeast in diagonal lines that intersect the entire island, and along the lines, those parallel lines that are diagonally running through the island, are also these balanced stones. And they're massive balanced stones. I mean, there's a stone in North Salem, New York, that's called Balanced Rock, that's believed to be 60, 70 tons. These are even bigger than that. So they're pointing too. These stones are always pointing. So one archaeologist made mention that one of the stones was pointing to petroglyphs. Another stone was pointing to a grave site. So there was directionality to the positioning of the stones, and they were positioned along these diagonal lines. I tried to link up fault lines with thinking that there's a connection, because a lot of times these stones and these sites are running along fault lines. There's so many fault lines in Aruba. We live in a very, an earthquake, a place where we do get frequent earthquakes. Okay, thank goodness, not large, but at least not that I've experienced. But, we get them. We just had one, I think, about a month ago. So it is possible that they were doing this to harness some sort of energy or something at these sites on these fault lines. So that's another interesting component. And also interesting to note that Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao were once 3 islands, and they were separated by a series of mega tsunamis. And this is geologically shown in studies that there were once one island. So this is an area prone to disaster, and maybe these stones could help them determine if something was going to happen, help them predict things a little easier. I don't know how, maybe control it. I don't know. It's a mystery, but they definitely were very busy with megaliths and monoliths here.
So do you think with everything that you just told me, how they're obviously intelligent, right? But at the same time, they're kind of like behind on the technology, but maybe their technology is different from what we think would be good technology. But my question is, do you think that maybe at one point they were way more technologically advanced than they were recently? Because when I read the story of David and Goliath, Goliath he had nice armor on, like very nice armor, he even had a weapon that, when you read about the weapon that he had, it's almost like a piece of metal that shot lightning out. Like it's some very weird weapon that he had. And then he also had 4 other brothers, and they were all, wearing nice jewelry and nice armor. And then you just read older stuff, the Greeks, all those different older civilizations. And, those are very beautiful buildings that they built. And a lot of it talks about, how the Titans built them and all this stuff. So do you think maybe because I believe in the mythology I think there's truth to everything. So I think when the Greeks were talking about there was giants walking around and Hercules was a giant, I believe he was a giant. So, and they had, weight. I mean, they sound more technically advanced back then than what you're describing now. So maybe something happened, some kind of cataclysm that wiped out their technology and, and their dads that showed them. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there had to be a way for them to lift these stones. So, I don't know if they used a technology or, used something that, like, for example, a coral castle in Homestead, Florida was some way to levitate these stones and position the stones. And so that's the part that's interesting to me, because I mean, even if they're giants, I suppose they could all get together and lift these stones. It would have been an immense job. Also, the stones, some of them were quarried from other places and specifically chosen and placed very far away, many miles away, on these bases that they were settling on. So I don't know about the technology. I haven't seen anything aside from these balance stones and the geoglyphs. So they also, though on the entire island of Aruba, they built a isosceles triangle. We have a natural formation of these caves, which are called Kanashito caves, and these are made of a limestone. It's like a huge mesa, for example, of limestone, and in there are several caves where we find drawings and burials and the birthing chamber. And then we have a place called Io Rock Formation, which is this huge place of diorite boulders, also drawings there. We have many alignments there. And then we have another spot called Kasabari Rock Formation, which is almost like a pyramid shape that mirrors this extinct volcano. This is also right outside my window. And they all make a perfect isosceles triangle. So, and it's very interesting. So what was the point of that? Why were they making, and also their burials were in isosceles triangles. Also their tools had isosceles triangles. We find bits of tools where they put a stamp on it, and the stamp is an isosceles triangle.
That's really weird.
So, yeah, it's very, very weird. And that was just discovered during an archaeological excavation that was done, I guess, almost 1 year ago. In the summer, it will be 1 year ago. So they were obsessed with isosceles triangles. You have to ask yourself why. Yeah. The statistical probability of this isosceles triangle being formed on the Earth, like they did with these rock formations and the caves, is 0.0001% chance that it happened by chance. So it was clearly something that was man-made, on purpose. So the only conclusion I can even come close to with regard to isosceles triangles is there is one of the oldest documented constellations in the night sky in the southern hemisphere is the constellation of Triangularum, which also has its own galaxy. And there, during the summer solstice around June 20th, 21st, 22nd, for a couple of hours after the sun sets, or maybe even an hour in some cases, you can see over the horizon a Triangularum, only at that certain point. So it's a southern hemisphere constellation that you could see briefly. I often wonder, was there a connection between the isosceles triangles and the triangulum, which is in the shape of an isosceles triangle? I don't know. This is a reoccurring theme, though, in ancient civilizations of triangles, particularly isosceles triangles. So I don't know if there's a connection to that. They also, another thing the archaeologists noted was that the archaic giants, they did most of what the archaeologists called ritual and religious activity, but we have no description of what ritual and religious activity they were doing. But most of it was done on limestone. So that limestone to them was, I guess, connected in some way to their ritual, spirituality. And it's interesting because limestone has a crystalline structure. So was there something in the limestone that was, I don't know, that augmenting whatever they were trying to do. But it was interesting that the archaeologists made note of that specifically. But other than that, I don't see much evidence of something, like the Moai in Easter Island, for example, how they do it and how they carve them and position them. And they had to have some technology because, for example, when they were toppled by a tsunami, they had to build equipment in Japan and bring it over in container ships and then build the equipment again to put the tsunamis back up. And they were failing over and over, by the way. It was a big struggle and took a lot of time and over a year. So you have to wonder, how did they do it? Is there something we're missing? Obviously there is. And just being a giant, I don't think ensures that you can lift these stones and position these stones and do these things. So there could have been something more, and I just haven't discovered what that is yet.
Yeah, I agree with you. They are very strong. I mean, this is the way I see it. When you're a kid, 2-3 years old, and you see a regular brick, and you try to pick it up, it's very heavy. But as an adult, right now, something about 15 feet tall would replicate that according to my size. Cause I mean, to this brick, to this little kid is like 100 pounds. To me, it's exactly what it is, 3 pounds. So if something is just a few feet taller than me, that's not fully human. Number two, it's obviously going to be a lot stronger than me. So, I mean, a strong man, the strongest man in the world could, lift up a Beetle, a Volkswagen Beetle from the back. This giant could probably just pick it up and go like this. So I do believe they're very strong, but I don't think they're strong to the point where they're just picking up 80-ton, rocks. I don't think that's even possible. I mean, who knows? But they did have some kind of technology, 100%. And you're talking about these triangles. The first thing I think about, there's pyramids all over the world. You got all these little stories about giants helping the humans build the pyramids. You even have stories about supposedly giants were helping build Solomon's temple. And, you have all these different, giants. There's always giants in every civilization, every creed, culture, past, present, whatever. There's always giant worship at some point. All the, just like the Greek mythology, like I said, they're all giants. All the gods were giants and their sons were smaller giants. And they did have technology because, like I said, if any of that's true, some of those statues that were built are beautiful. They look like, the muscles are perfect and everything. So they also, it looks like a human that was petrified because everything's perfect. Yeah. So, yeah, I do think, I agree. There definitely is some kind of technology. When you look at the structures in Peru, they kind of look like bricks that were clay and they kind of dry it up because they look, they kind of look like soft. You know what I mean? Like they were mud at some point and then they kind of, interlock like this. Like they say, you can't put a piece of paper through it. Some kind of technology. I don't know if they're mixing some kind of limestone and rock and it hardened right away. Who knows, but definitely I agree with you. There's definitely some kind of technology. And like I said, you got these biblical stories and other stories that are building very nice, weapons, made of iron. And then, some of these giants that were found in the Americas, they had jewelry on, gold jewelry, nice jewelry, ruby, stuff like that. So, I mean, they were making jewelry. They knew how to make stuff that was very nice. They were adorned with jewelry. They had their own, nice, clothing and stuff like that. So, I mean, I don't think they were like cavemen because some people try to say these are cavemen. You know what I mean? These are not cavemen. Or they try to say it's a mastodon that was uncovered. I don't know about you, but I don't never seen a mastodon, wear a crown and wear a necklace. So I don't think they were dinosaurs at all. I believe they were exactly what we're talking about. They were a giant race of some kind of humanoid species that is definitely a hybrid, because you also have the ones that have the double rows of teeth. There's even the one with the horns. You want to have the horns, that one skull with the horns. I mean, that's creepy right there all in itself. And then you tell me these ones have a big old head in the back. And the first thing that I think about is that movie Alien, from the 80s, with Sigourney Weaver. That's the first thing that I picture. You know what I mean? That big old head.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you have, what's that ancient king from Egypt? His statue looks like that. Like he has,
Akhenaten.
there you go. He has a little head, but he kind of looks like maybe like a hybrid, like a little bit diluted bloodline, because it's not that big. But he also has like a weird feminine body. He has like a belly with big hips. It just looks all messed up. You know what I mean? If I saw that in real life, I'd probably jump and get scared. Like, what are you doing in my room?
That whole bloodline looks strange.
Yeah, it looks very.
Tutankhamun, Nefertiti, Mina, they all have elongated skulls. It's very strange.
And, most scientists will tell you the bigger the brain, the smarter you are, right? So they had bigger brains than us. And I don't know if you ran into this, but there's even stories that these giants had supernatural abilities. There's even some stories that they could shout, like the Native Americans, their shout was so loud that it would paralyze you. And yes, of course, there's fear, but the way it's described is that it's something you couldn't control. Like they would shout, the shout was so loud that it would send a vibration through your body and just paralyze you. And then, the ones in the Americas were always cannibals and rapists. So they would try to take the women and rape them. If they couldn't rape them, they would eat them. So you have all this crazy different kind of species of giants. Some are, monstrous like that. Some are very intelligent. They have swords, weapons, they have pyramids, all this crazy stuff. So I don't know. It's very, like I said, it's why it's so interesting to talk about, because I have no idea what's going on, but I have this much information out of this much information. So yeah, who knows?
It's frustrating. I wish, I wish there was a concerted effort for people to do more research, particularly the archaeologists and the anthropologists, because, and I wish there wasn't some sort of an embargo on everything for example, my ex-boyfriend was the head of archaeology here in Aruba. So I know a lot of this because he's told me this. And he would tell me, look, I can't say anything publicly. You're going to have to do it because I don't want to ruin my reputation. I'm thinking, what?
Yeah.
I don't understand how it would hurt. I don't even understand. I
think there's always a group of people. I think you're going to get more attention and more, without sounding like a money hungry person, but you need money to do this. But I think you'd get more money and you get more help from people if you do this, because it seems like it's just like 10 of us in the whole world that are researching this. No, there's millions of people that are interested in this. And a lot of those people got some money and they want answers, so they'll shell it right over. So I don't think it will hurt. I don't think it will hurt his career at all. It would definitely turn off a group of people, but who cares? Bye. It doesn't really matter. We're trying to get to the bottom of the truth. If you don't want to know the truth, that's cool. Keep watching Netflix, whatever it is that you do. So, that's the way I see it. That's the way I see it. So I really think he should have definitely came out that, it's just my opinion. I don't want to start any arguments.
I agree. We argued about it constantly. Yeah, because I don't agree with it. And I don't understand, it is true. So it is part of the archaeological record. I don't understand, I think sometimes people are in positions and are paid to not speak, to not do the research, to not tell the truth, but to stick to that narrative. And I think that's, sadly the case here, as well as globally with archaeologists and anthropologists and the rest of those experts, that they are paid to do a job, and that job is not necessarily what we think it is. Sometimes it's to be quiet and not disclose things. And so, I'm always intrigued because a lot of the studies I got from him as well, the ones I couldn't find anywhere else. And he's, shared information with me that he wants me to talk about. So I'm writing a book. He wants to write the foreword to the book. So maybe that's a little bit of his disclosure, but it is very frustrating because he's not the only one. We all know tons of archaeologists who don't want to touch us with a 10-foot pole, pardon the pun, because they're just so, I don't know. A lot of them are ego driven and also need to be supported and sponsored financially. And for some reason, this topic just throws people over the edge. I don't get it at all. I think it's the most fascinating thing. I always say, if I was going to school and, and when I was a kid and my teacher was saying, okay, kids, tomorrow we're going to learn about the giants. I'd be like,
yeah,
oh my
I
God,
bet, yeah.
cannot wait. I'd be so into education and school. I mean, I always was anyway, but still it would be fascinating for everybody, and I don't understand the obsession with keeping it quiet, because how much longer, now there's like this soft disclosure going on with like the New York Post. So how, what, is it because it's just, it's too overwhelming at this point? There are too many of us talking. There's too much evidence. I don't know. I like the way it's going. I think it's very slow, but I'm hopeful that, there will be an opening up of this field and we can really inject some money into the research, quite frankly.
Yeah. And like I was saying, you have guys like Ali Marzulli and Steve Quayle. That's what they did their whole life. They're very open about it. And I don't think they're doing too bad. I don't think they're doing too bad at all. They look like they have all the funding they need to. 1 week they're in Peru, next week they're over here, they're over there. So it sounds like they're getting the funding that they want. So I really think people should open up and talk about this. And you can, for example, we can get into like this giant stuff and it gets even deeper. We got even, you got even stories from Alexander the Great and Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus talking about 7-8 foot tall men with dog heads. Okay. This stuff goes deep into these different creatures, the bull-headed men and lion-headed men. It's crazy when you think about it, because all this stuff has just as much evidence as the giants do. So all that stuff, like you said, tomorrow in school, we're going to learn about the dog-headed man and the giants, I want to go to school. I want to learn about fairies and all that crazy stuff. So all that stuff is very interesting to me. I think this is why it's starting to get more track on it, but it's also a lot of people that like to force it in their direction. Like, some people just want to, oh, this is the evidence, but this is only because of this religion, only because of the, it doesn't matter the religion, it's all over the world, no matter what you believe in or don't believe in. There's some things that are, everything's not an opinion. There's some things that are facts. And and the skulls are on display to this day, right? You can see the ones in Peru. And then you told me, is there anywhere else you can see these skulls besides Peru? Because most everything's over there, but is there anywhere else you can take a look at these things?
Well, so in Aruba, in the Caribbean, in Bonaire, at the Bonaire Museum, there is a giant skeleton on display.
Wow.
I confirmed with the head of the museum, which is run by the government. This is a government official. This just happened in October. I confirmed with him. I have his information. We're in contact. It's funny you bring up LA too, because before I went to Bonaire, I spoke with LA, and we were offering money to do a DNA test on the skeleton of the giant in Bonaire. So when I went there and I spoke to the government official, he said, no, this is a giant. It's a giant. He said, it's completely a giant. He said that, I said, well, we want to do a DNA test, an independent DNA test on the giant. And he said, I can't let you do that because within the last couple of months, 2 different groups have come and take parts of the bones of the giant skeleton to do DNA testing. So it's interesting. So this is all very fascinating for a couple of reasons. First of all, that skeleton was found in the late 1970s. The archaeological report on the Bonaire skeleton was written in 1980. The conclusion of the archaeologists at the end of that report state that this was indeed a giant and that Vespucci was correct, and that this skeletal remains was at least over 8 feet tall. Excuse me. So then he told me, the government official, that the people who had taken the bones, one of them was an archaeologist who's based down here, which is, out of nowhere. And then the other was someone from Italy, which is quite odd. And so my fear is that we'll never get the full archaeological report. So, excuse me, even though these people are doing all this research, maybe they'll never tell us the truth. And so that's why I was hoping I could do an independent study on the DNA myself. But sadly, he would not give me any of the bones, even for money.
Yeah. Is there a picture of this thing anywhere that we can look at? Of this skeleton? Is there any pictures or somewhere I could Google this? Because I want to check this thing out.
Yeah. So, okay. So on my Facebook page and my Instagram, The Islands of the Giants, Heather L. Arnold. I'm also on X. I have pictures of the giant skulls that were on display and the Bonaire skeleton. Okay. I believe it is my Instagram profile pic for the Islands of the Giants is the head of the Bonaire skeleton, which is very strange. Huge eye sockets, elongated skull.
I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, I definitely see it.
Yeah. So that was there. And then the two missing skulls, I have the entire archaeological report on those two missing skulls. I also, by a government official, told to me that they were giant skulls that were taken, and it's believed to be they were taken by the Archaeology Museum in Curacao. So I contacted them through this government official in Curacao, and they would neither confirm or deny whether or not they had the skeletal remains. So it looks like I'll have to make another trip back to Curacao, which isn't a bad thing, but I hope to get those skulls back to Aruba, where they were unearthed from the cemetery here and just put on display in Curacao. So that's what, interestingly, I did try to do a DNA test and I couldn't do it. So because the government official did not want any more bone taken from the skeleton at that time. So let's see if we get the results and they're conclusive either way. That would be interesting. If not, and they're hiding it from us or not telling us everything, then I hope to go back and maybe make another pitch to do an independent DNA study.
Yeah, who did they let the people, the ones that did take them, who did they allow to go take them? Who were the ones that took it?
It was, one is an archaeologist he's an archaeologist down here. He's based in St. Martin.
You should go knock on his door. You should go.
Yeah, well. I have a way I can contact him. It's just whether or not he'll disclose. You know? The other were two gentlemen from Italy, which is quite interesting. So I always think Italy. I think the Vatican. Yes,
because the Vatican take all the bones all the time. Yeah.
And we have a story of that down here. So there was I guess it was not a monk, like a priest who was down here based in Grenada. And he had heard, and this was in the early 1500s, about the early mid-1500s, and he had heard that there were giants in Aruba, and he wanted to have skeletal remains to send to the Vatican. And he did get a hold of a femur of a skeleton, and he sent it on a ship on its way to the Vatican, and it never reached the destination. So we don't know what happened to the femur, but it was interesting because that was the goal. I mean, maybe it did reach, but the story is it never reached, or someone stole it, or it's very mysterious. But yes, there was interest at the Vatican for these bones.
Yeah, the Vatican's has their hands in everything, not just that. We all know how those people, exactly, how they work. I think they're the opposite of anything godly, but that's just another podcast for another time.
Right. I agree in some ways, yes.
Yeah, just really quick. I don't know if you read this, but the history book of Flavius Josephus. You ever heard of that guy?
I know, yes, but I've not read that book.
Yeah, no. He's a Jewish historian. He was one of the centurions also. No, actually he was a Roman. I think he was a Roman and, kind of converted, but he was a centurion anyways. And his writing is a book about this big. It's all, it's all the history he recorded, everything from talking about when Jesus was walking on the earth and all this stuff. And he wasn't a believer in God at all. So it's not like it's biased or anything, but what he wrote was, I'm going to read it right here. He said, there were till then left the race of giants who had bodies so large and the countenance so entirely different from other men that they were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing. The bones of these men are still shown to this very day, unlike to any credible relations of another man. So he's talking about that these things were on display during his time when he was alive. So it's like there's nothing here that says this is a conspiracy. Like everything here, like people always say, well, I want to hear from a person, that's historical. Well, like we just said, we got this guy right here. We base a lot of our history off this guy. He's talking about it. You got those other guys that I just talked about, Alexander and all those other guys. They talked about giants. You want to believe Moses is a historical figure. He killed a giant, and, King Og of Bashan, and so on and so on. You got, a lot of people believe in the story of David and Goliath. Well, he also killed that thing. And then we got you, talking about everything that you just talked about. We got the skulls on display in Peru, and then the ones that you saw. So at this point, the people that don't believe it, I just don't think they want to believe it. I think it's more like a personal thing. They don't want to believe like that anything like this is true, because maybe it affects the way they live. Maybe they have a certain belief, some kind of certain religion. And if this is true, it might destroy, maybe this is true. Maybe I need to change my life up. And then, the other route is that some people just want to believe in anything. Some people don't want to believe in anything. Everything's an accident. It's all silly stuff. It's all silly. These are just tall basketball players. Just these dumb, little exits that they try to take. So right. A question that I have for you, do you have any kind of, sort of belief where these things are from? Like, do you have like a narrative where they're from? Like, do you think it's like the heavenly angels? Like, what do you think? Like, do you have your own type of?
Well, so I'm in the Antillean Islands, right? The Antilles, the Lesser Antilles and the Greater Antilles. And Antilles is, the etymology of that word is of Atlantis.
Okay.
So that's quite interesting. So the early explorers thought that these islands were the remnants of Atlantis. I don't know if that's true, obviously, but it could be. And if that's the case, then it would make sense that maybe these people were, refugees from Atlantis, a nation, a country, a continent that was being absorbed by the sea. So that could be a case, But other than that, they seem to have been indigenous here. They seem to have come from here out of nowhere. There's no real indication where they could have originally come from. Whereas we know the later period Amerindians who made their way here, we know that they came from Venezuela. One interesting note is that there were two breakaway civilizations that were noted by the archaeologists and written about quite extensively. One is in Cuba and one is in Colombia, in the rainforest, in the jungles of Colombia. So it appears, based off of the burials and the skeletal remains, the shape of the skeletal remains, etc., how they set up in isosceles triangles, that there were people here who eventually broke off and went to these other places, Cuba and in Colombia. So that's kind of interesting too. We don't hear any more about it. I haven't heard any more research being done about it for years. But it is quite interesting to think that, why did they break away? Were they trying to expand their kingdom, so to speak? I'm not quite sure what the purpose would be. So no, I'm not sure where they're from. We just have hints here and there, but definitely I do fully believe that they were part of a group of giants that were related in some way, genetically, or from the same group that just splintered off. So that could be another component as well, and then separated by bodies of water and then began to create their own civilizations based off of where they were. So I don't know if people ask me, are they Nephilim, are there aliens, I don't know. I really don't know. And I don't know if we'll ever know that. But there are many intriguing clues as to how prolific they were, and the fact that these islands were named after Atlantis is quite interesting too.
Well, the one thing that we could all connect together, whether you believe in the Bible or you're a pagan or you're an atheist, it doesn't matter. Every single civilization that talks about these giants have the same story. Their dads were from the sky and their moms were from Earth. So that right there, 100%, I could agree to that, because why are we going to believe everything that these people said in the past except for that? So, right. So I do believe so, why would they make that up? It's kind of dumb that all around the world from thousands of years, civilizations that are apart, not knowing each other, all have the same story. The dad came from the sky,
Exactly.
dad came from the sky, mom was from Earth. And that is the story for every single story that talks about where these giants came from. So one thing that I could definitely, one of my opinions that I have is that when Joshua and Caleb from the Bible, they had the conquest of Joshua and Caleb, they went to the promised land and there was a bunch of giants there, and they were the sons of Enoch, which to me were the bloodline of the Anunnaki. And there were a bunch of giants there. They were huge. They were about 20, 30 feet tall because they were grasshoppers in their sight, as they said. And when this conquest happened, they went in and they killed most of them, and they fled the area because they were getting wiped out by the humans. And right there, by Israel, you can go to the ocean and you could just go spread out from there. You get on some boats and spread out. Maybe that's how they got to the Americas after that conquest. They all spread out. Some landed in America, some landed in South America, some landed in Mexico. So that's another theory that I have, because they got slaughtered. A lot of them got slaughtered during that conquest because they were. And then another thing too, the way it's described, the fruit were giant too. Like the grapes were like this big, each grape. And so, with these things genetically modifying the fruit too, because today the only way you can get fruit like that is if you genetically modify it. So again, I think they were very intelligent. I think they can mess with the DNA and stuff like that, because, you have all these stories of these weird creatures. Like I said, dog-headed man, that's all over the world. In India, that's from many different famous explorers. We get our history from. It's all over the world. So, were these genetically modified creatures, or did they make them? Who knows? You got the Greek mythology, you got the centaurs, the three-headed dogs, all that stuff. And just in the last 100 years, what's that Nazi scientist guy? He cut that monkey's head off or he cut the monkey's head off and put it on another monkey and it lived, or he cut that dog's head off and it stayed alive, just the head. So if we can do that, what are we doing today and what was happening back then? So I really think that these giants, and even humans too, we were way more technologically advanced than we were today. And I believe whoever their dads were, angels, whatever you want to call them, they were very, very much smarter than the giants as well. That's what I think. Yeah, that's my whole thing on it. Yeah, I definitely do believe that their dads were the ones that taught them, the extra technology, because they were obviously very much more intelligent and much more superior to us in every single way, from the mind to the physical body. And like I said,
and they lived here a long time too. Yeah. So they weren't fumbling around life. They actually had long, extensive civilizations that lasted quite a time, so the giants were at least from 25,000 BC, probably earlier. And they eventually, quote unquote, died out. But I don't think they really died out. I think they bred out in the early 1500s. We do have notation of one of the explorers coming here and saying that when they were leaving, and this was later period explorers who were coming when they wanted to take over the island, that they saw the giants standing with average statured people. So the giants were still here until I think the early 1500s. The giant that's found in Bonaire, the giant skeleton, is believed to be 450 years old. So that's a recent skeleton, and recent, in terms of time. So it could be, I think these giants were living, the oldest remains here are 7,000 years old, and that's the newest number they came up with. They used to think it was 5,000. Now they think it's 7,000 years old. So these were people who were very successful at what they were doing and were dominant, and they didn't die off quickly. And when they eventually did, I think it was more that they bred themselves out, not necessarily died out completely.
Yeah, and I do think there's still giants alive today with a higher amount of, genetics or whatever their dad comes from. I do think there's some that are still alive, like just like you have that, the giant in Iraq, 10 years ago, however long it was, they killed that. So, I mean, that thing was pretty dang big for it to be, not diluted in its, genetics. And supposedly this thing was like 200 years old. That's what the locals were saying. It was very old. So these things have a longer lifespan. Again, like all this stuff to me just sounds like whoever their father is something divine and something extra stronger physically and mentally. Like I said, they're living longer, they're stronger, they're faster than us, they have bigger brains than us. Whatever these things are coming from, they're coming from a very high source of just everything more superior in general. Just everything's more superior. But I mean, I guess they're not that superior because it kind of got wiped out and taken out by the humans, but they were definitely a force to be reckoned. And at one point in the world, they were, the leaders of everything, even like you see the Egyptian hieroglyphs, you got that big old king sitting on the throne, got little guys trying to give him food. He's probably eating the people too, who knows, but, so many different things to unravel here. And who knows, they're probably writing on giant dinosaurs too, because we have all these hieroglyphs of humans right beside dinosaurs. So who knows, maybe they're writing a T-Rex. It's kind of funny to think about, but you don't know. You don't know what these things were doing. You have the Native Americans, they said these things were so big they can run next to a bison and pick it up and just boom, bite it in half and throw the other half. That right there is insane to even think about. That's terrifying. That's a terrifying predator, just apex predator. There's no way that you could fight these things one-on-one unless you outsmart it. And then there's even things that I read that these things could regenerate really fast. So you had to cut its head off, or else it would just regenerate right there, kind of like a vampire thing. You got to cut the head off or get hit it in the heart, because apparently these things could regenerate within minutes. You chop the fingers off, I guess it'll grow back. That's the things that I've heard. So man, you can go on and on with all these different stories that people have talked about, and some say that their eyes would glow, like a red or an orange. So, to me, again, that just tells me, their father, who their father was, they're like the whole angel thing. Angels are made of light. So the first thing I think about, they have the glowing eyes, and we don't have to, so for the people that are listening, you don't have to call them angels, whatever, because some people get all butthurt about the terminology, but I'm just saying whatever people were seeing back then, that these angelic figures, alien figures, whatever you want to call them, they were made of light, because when they always appear with light. They're just like their skin radiates, their eyes glow. The ancient people called them the shining ones. And then in the Hebrew or the Jewish mythology, they called them the seraphim, which means fiery serpent. So you have all this glowing descriptions of possibly the fathers of these giants. And then they're glowing, their eyes are glowing. And then they have, extra abilities that we don't have, like telepathic, some say they can speak to you telepathically and, put thoughts in your head that are not there, just stuff like that. Kind of like how people describe what aliens do and stuff. So, like I said, who knows, we can ponder on this all day, but I definitely learned a lot from you. I never heard about, giants in Aruba, but, I'm not surprised either. Because like you said, they're on the islands of Malta, the Solomon Islands. They always like to hang out on islands. I don't know why. Maybe because they want to be left alone. I mean, I don't know, but they do like the islands, and they like living in caves. They like living in caves. They love caves. There's a whole breed in the Bible. I forgot what they named them, the Hivites, I think, which means cave dwellers. So there was a whole tribe of giants that lived in caves. Then you have all these underground tunnels all around the world that connect from this continent to that continent. Yeah. So maybe they were using those tunnels. I mean, we can go on and on about all this, but everything that people discover, you can always connect it to something that's related to that. Does that make any sense? Right. So every piece of history you read could go back to giants. Everything goes back to giants, and people think that's crazy, but go ahead and do the research yourself. You'll see. Yeah. Do a non-biased research, and find out for yourself. Everything goes back to giants. I have no idea why, but some way, somehow, these things were like our worst enemy, I guess. They enslaved us. They cannibalized us when they ran out of food. Because, these things were eating so much food. When you read, like, what people describe, these things were eating, like, they had to eat, like, like 50, 60 pounds of food a day. You know, we're talking about meat. So there's only so many cows you can breed fast enough to feed these people or these things, whatever they are. So yeah, I just, man, it's very fascinating to think about. But before we, I have to end the show in about 10 minutes here. So I just wanted to ask you, is there anything else that you would like to talk about that's like your favorite thing that you found, or something that's very like your most favorite discovery or something like that?
Well, I think, there's so many, thank goodness, because it's like the gift that keeps on giving. And I think the birthing chamber was fascinating to me, because to see that petroglyph of this woman with this baby in her, and know that this is a global motif that's found even as far away as Japan, that was very fascinating. I also, in Bonaire, there is something called the Divine Mother. And she's about a 10 to 12 foot tall statue made out of limestone, again with a veil. She also welcomes the summer solstice sunrise on the island of Bonaire. She looks out into the sea. You can see, I have pictures of her on my social media. You can see her face. You can see her veil. She's outside of the mouth of a cave that has all these cave drawings that some people actually think are Proto-Mayan, which is even more interesting. And I think she was kind of a shock to me to see her. And that's where they say the giants were from. In Bonaire, there is a stone called the Mother Stone, and in the middle of the stone is an indentation that they call the navel, the actual navel of the world. And it's through that stone and it's a monolith of limestone that they believe the giants came out of. They were attached by an umbilical cord to the center of the earth where their mother, where the source is that birthed them. And that this 10, 12 foot tall woman is really maybe an early depiction of the giants and what they look like. And she sometimes, when you go to visit her, I visited her now 4 times, people will put little gifts at her feet. And she's called the Divine Mother, or the Mother Stone. And then there's an actual Mother Stone, or called the Bonaire Stone, that gave birth to the giants. So those 2 sites are very interesting and intriguing. And I also like to think, maybe this statue, you're staring into the face of what a giant female looked like. And she is actually huge. I have pictures of me next to her on my social media.
Yeah, that's very interesting about the whole umbilical cord thing. If, eventually here, when you have time, I want to bring you back on and do a whole nother subject on this stuff, because it's very interesting. Can't even scratch the surface on this stuff. There's so much information.
So much. I agree.
And then, we can even get into about the, whatever those giants are, there's always stories of little people, like not midgets, like little people. We're talking about little gnomes or something like that. There's even, I started laughing when I did a podcast with someone. I didn't laugh because I was taking it as a joke. I laughed because I just couldn't believe it. This guy was saying, when he was doing all this research, they found a giant that was buried in the Americas, and they had a bunch of little dwarfs buried with it, and they all had white hair. They all had like white hair on their, it remind me of owls. What owls, they always have white blonde hair. So I just started laughing. Like, what is Lord of the Rings, man? So then I looked it up, and yeah, this is true that they find giants buried with little people sometimes. And they're not like, they also have a weird, genetic, bloodline too. Their father's bloodline is nowhere to be found on earth. And they have, human mothers all the time. So, there's so much we could talk about. Like, for example, elves, Al, the word Al is God, or the boss, in Hebrew, Elohim, and so forth. Elon Musk, why does he name himself Al? You know what I mean? So all these, and L. Ron Hubbard. So I think these people have a lot of information, what's going on, but, we could definitely get into that on another episode. I would love to. But before we close it out here, again, one more time, just tell the people where we can find your research, your work. And then, definitely, if I had the money, I'd go out there right now and go take one of those tours. That'd be crazy. I would love to do that. But go ahead and tell us where to find all your stuff.
I'll be here whenever you want to come tour. I'll be here down in paradise. Yeah. Please look for me on Facebook, on X, and on Instagram. I'm Heather L. Arnold on all of them, and also the Islands of the Giants. I also run a Facebook group called Stones, Bones, and the Paranormal, and people contribute a lot of their own personal research there, which I really promote because I want to promote independent researchers.
And I'm in the process of writing a book that I hope will come out soon. And of course, you guys will be the first to know when it does.
Thank you. I would definitely get a copy. So with that being said, we're going to close out the show. Don't hang up, though. I'm just going to stop recording here. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming back to the Sabbath at Midnight. It was a very interesting podcast. Learned a lot of stuff, and definitely want to have her back on. I want to thank her right now again for coming on and taking her time to be on the show. God bless everybody. Have a good morning, good evening, whatever the case is, to all my listeners around the world. But for me, it is good afternoon. It is about 3:30 in the afternoon. So good afternoon, everybody, and goodbye.